Since the release of Dynasty Warriors 2 in 2000, fans of the 1 vs 1000 formula have revisited the story of the Three Kingdoms several times. While the repetitive gameplay hasn't changed much between games, loyal fans have stuck with the Dynasty Warriors series. While keeping with the standard combat formula, the 9th installment attempts to combine this with an open world format. Instead of chapters simply being a single battle, players can now explore an enormous open world that feels more alive than ever before. The big question is, just how well do these new ideas Omega Force conjured up work in execution? The plot is basically the same story as in previous Dynasty Warrior games, although, like each previous entry, it tries to shed light on new characters and go into greater depth with the familiar aspects. This starts at the close of the 2nd century during the Han Dynasty and continues several decades into the Three Kingdoms period. There are 5 different story paths, but Shu, Wei, and Wu are the only ones initially available, and out of the 94 characters, only Liu Bei, Xiao Xiao, and Sun Jian are playable right away. After the player reaches a certain point in the story, Jin and the other kingdoms will unlock, with the latter path focusing on characters such as Lu Bu and Zhang Zhao. The story begins with the all too familiar Yellow Turban Rebellion, and as the story progresses, we see various historical figures rise to power in their respective kingdoms, recruiting the large roster of characters. With the new format, there are several cutscenes in each chapter to keep the player aware of the plot's progression, making it easily the most digestible story in Dynasty Warriors franchise. The combat is the same basic concept of the 1 vs many, but Omega Force has made some changes to the tried and true format. Each chapter has a major conflict as a focal point, but instead of fighting the battle and moving on to the next chapter, there is an open world to explore. For example, in Chapter 2, the primary goal is to eliminate Dong Zhou, but prior to fighting him, the player will have to participate in smaller battles spread across the land. In addition to the mandatory battles, there are other optional activities to partake in, such as running errands for villagers, conquering other bases, or fishing and hunting. In addition to raising the player's level, taking out officers and capturing important bases can lower the prime objective requirements, making this a good strategy if players find themselves initially underleveled. There are some great changes to the overall gameplay though, allowing combat to flow a little better.
You said it, brother!
For example, the grappling hook is a great inclusion that allows players to get on top of rooftops and scale walls with ease, while the addition of special attacks gives far more variety to combat, even though it doesn't change it dramatically. In the end, there are some changes that aid to the game's overall experience, but it does come with some setbacks. The open world setting is the biggest change, and is what sets it apart from past Dynasty Warrior titles. Each chapter offers a vast open space to explore, with the tactical map retaining the traditional red and blue sections to represent kingdom control. Unfortunately, the open world feature feels like an outline for what direction Omega Force wants to take the series instead of a fully realized implementation.
Oh, this is most distressing!
Enemy bases are pretty much set up in the same manner, although the addition of the conveniently placed explosive barrels is a nice touch. The villager missions are your typical busy work. Go kill these group of bandits, kill these group of wolves, bring back 3 fish, and so on. While it's possible to spend several hours on a single chapter completing every mission, the repetitive nature will most likely make players want to move on well before completing everything. Hunting and fishing are very generic and simple, and they really don't feel like a necessary inclusion. Crafting powerful weapons and items require a lot of material, and the time to hunt down sufficient quantities of specified goods feels like a tedious chore than an engaging gameplay mechanic. Finally, there's great potential for an open world divide and conquer co-op strategy, but unfortunately for the first time in a mainline Dynasty Warriors game since 2, we're left without cooperative play. There is so much here that we want to see expanded upon, but as it is right now, the content is a little thin. In terms of the visuals, the character models are what you would expect from Dynasty Warriors. Familiar faces are recognizable with some variations so they don't look identical to previous iterations. Common graphical flaws are still present here. Slowdown isn't much of an issue, but groups of enemies have a tendency to vanish into thin air mid-fight, or just appear out of nowhere. Environmental geometry sometimes has the same problem. as there have been times when our character was stopped by an invisible wall that just turned out to be a tree that hadn't materialized yet. The frame rate and animations hold up for the most part, at least at full HD. However, when playing this at 4K on a PlayStation 4 Pro, the frame rate is unbearable, to the point where it's nearly unplayable at times. It's not the best looking game out there, and sure, it has some technical issues, but that's pretty par for the course. Dynasty Warriors 9 maintains the core gameplay elements that will make this an enjoyable title for longtime fans. Unfortunately, it's not without its flaws though, with the lack of cooperative play being the most glaring exclusion. The open world approach is a nice attempt to move the series forward, however the way it has been implemented feels incomplete. As it is, Omega Force has laid the groundwork for Dynasty Warriors 10, where if these ideas were fleshed out and more developed, this could be a great open world experience. During our time with the game, it became more and more apparent just how much better it could have been.
But I suppose I could throw you a bone.
Now, despite these shortcomings, Dynasty Warriors 9 is still a good game, and the story is the most detailed and fleshed out of any campaign before it. Unfortunately, the repetitive gameplay and side quests that are handled with the approach of quantity over quality, this solo experience will have a difficult time holding even the most devoted Dynasty Warriors fans' interest. As always, if you like this review, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Otherwise, for everything gaming related, head on over to hardcoregamer.com for your fix.